Welcome back to a very overdue episode of Versus, our show that pits bodybuilder versus bodybuilder. From different eras, the same era, it doesn't matter. We do it all here. Today, it's Dorian Yates, 6 times Mr. Olympia, versus 8-time Mr. Olympia, Ronnie Coleman. Who's the best? And I got Chris Aceto, the technician, here to help me handicap all the action. Now, Chris, I don't think anyone's ever really compared Dorian Yates with Ronnie Coleman. Maybe it's been done before, but not a lot. You know, people kind of consider them different physiques. You and I grew up in the Dorian era. He was a huge influence on my physique and how I trained and how I competed and what my goals were. After Dorian retired, you know, the Ronnie Coleman era was ushered in, and you know, we thought it was going to be one of size and conditioning. It turned out to be even more size than we even anticipated. And a lot of people have crowned Ronnie as the greatest bodybuilder of all time. But we're here tonight to look at these guys side by side. Obviously, they couldn't stand on stage together at their best, but we have pictures when they were at their best. Ronnie Coleman, 2003. Dorian Yates, 1993, 10 years apart. Give me your assessment and your and how you view Ronnie versus Dorian before we get started here.
I mean, they're both considered like mass monsters, right? I mean, because they're both, the heaviest guys in the show, the biggest guys in the show. And obviously, actually, when you think about it, they're probably the most conditioned guys in the show many of the times that they competed. Having said that, originally I thought, looking at pictures and strolling down memory lane, I'd say, well, Coleman is this and Coleman is that in terms of, superior. But, I've been to shows that Coleman won. I've been to shows that Dorian won. I know who Dorian competed against, and I know who Ronnie competed against. And I almost want to take my hat off and say that, surprising even to myself, is I would probably say Dorian was better or more impressive in his own right than Coleman was impressive. At least a couple of shows that Dorian strung along his best looks, 93 and 95. I mean, those are shows that he was monumentally impressive, and Coleman's would be, of course, probably 2003 and 1998. Those were the 2 years that he was very dominant.
I would say 1999 he was better, but that's debatable.
No way. He's what did he say that at the Guru Seminar in Italy?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean that's not true. That's not Coleman's probably best, most complete, awe-inspiring, drop-dead condition, roundness, everything was probably the first time he won, 1998. 1998, the lineup was far better than 1999. I mean, there was more depth. The guys were in better condition. So I would say Coleman's best was 1998, including 2003. I mean, I was at the show 2003. Coleman was huge. I mean, but you can't say his level of detail and absolute drop-dead dryness in 2003 was anything close to 1998. People just get suckered into and bamboozled by the body weight, which was probably inflated anyway, because he was not on stage at 298 or whatever.
Right.
So, and you look back at Dorian, it's like he ushered in mass in 93, but if you look at his condition in 93, it was ridiculous. And look who got second and third in 93. We're not. I don't think we're posting up the pictures there, but if Flex Wheeler thinks that he looked better, he Flex in 1999 versus 1993, so getting second to in 1999 to Coleman, and Flex was second to Dorian in 1993. In 93, he was peeled. Flex was peeled in 93. So was Sean Ray, was at his absolute wackiest. 93 was his most peeled look, or 92, 3, 4, somewhere in there.
Let me rein it in here, Chris, for a second, because we're talking about Dorian Yates versus Ronnie Coleman. I saw Dorian Yates guest pose at the NPC Atlantic States 6 weeks before that 93 Olympia. My jaw hit the ground. I said, that's what I want to be like. I said, I didn't even think I would be capable of looking like that. He was so freaking amazing in 93. He was like 290 something on stage. We're watching him right now posing. on the Olympia stage for '93. He had no torn bicep then. He just was granite. And you know what? You could watch all the videos and see all the pictures you want until you were there in person and watch this guy. He was way more impressive in person. And I said to myself, man, that was one of the jaw-dropping episodes in my life. The other jaw-dropping episode was when Coleman in '98 and '93, like you said. I agree. Those two, and I don't think anyone else has impressed me as much as those three instances. Dorian '93, Coleman '98, and Coleman '03. Those were just incredible, which makes this comparison very hard. So let's go through the Dorian Yates, I guess, lineage in a sense. Dorian pretty much had a standard, that he had set with his back development. Nasser called him Backzilla because his back was so big. He felt he only had one body part, but he didn't. Dorian had calves, he had forearms, he had pecs, but the lats were just incredible. I mean, has there ever been a bodybuilder with better lat development than Dorian Yates?
No, I just did want to add that '93 guest pose, and Bob Gruskin was also at that show, Dave, and he actually called me and told me that Dorian had just guest posed and he'd just never seen anything like it ever. How's that?
Yeah, it was
So
that awe-inspiring. His calves looked like they were 30 inches. That's how big they were.
Yeah, and so no, his last like '95 Olympia. Someone gave me and Jay third row seats for the '95 Olympia, and that was a stellar lineup. And of course, when Dorian came out and set up and pumped his lats, just stand big. His lats looked like he had beach balls under each one of them. And it was hard to describe, and it was hard to describe in '95 after a very good Nasser came out, a very good Sean Ray came out, a very good Prime Levrone, Dillette, Claremont. They all came out, did their routines or whatever in prejudging, and then Dorian came out, and I just turned to Jay and I said, these guys are like amateurs next to him today.
People criticize Dorian for having bad shape, but he really didn't. He had a V taper. His waist was kind of small. I don't. People criticize him. His waist got a little, bulging stomach toward the end of his career, but he really had good structure. I don't know what people are talking about. Do you?
Well, it's one of these things that sometimes pictures don't transmit what you actually look like in real life. And in '95, to go back to that show, the prejudge, and I mean, that level of paper-thin skin does not show up in pictures, especially the pictures they would take in those day and age. Remember, Dave, you can go on Instagram today and get guys who look like they're in a condition that Flex Wheeler, Sean Ray, and Dorian never achieved in their lifetime because of the pixels or whatever, and the way you can contrast lighting and all these things. So it's all fraudulent lighting and photos. You know what I mean? You're able to get something far more clear than a photo from a stage from an Irvin Gelb from 20 years ago. So I mean, a lot of that crazy detail that really existed doesn't show up in regular type of non-digital, just print photos that they had back in that day. So, because the level of no skinness that I've seen Dorian in person is something that I've never seen, since on any bodybuilder in terms of head to toe. I've seen people with like crazy Christmas tree, super paper thin skin on their quads, all that type of stuff. So I think, that's the handicap for him, or that's part of it in trying to make the evaluation who's better. You go back and look at pictures. I've always said that Dorian's, one of the worst Mr. Olympians in pictures. He just doesn't look that impressive.
I'll tell you one thing. Dorian Yates became a hero of mine, essentially, or someone that I wanted to emulate in '93. In 1996, I actually got to step on stage with him at the, if you remember Jimmy Dakotas up in Boston, they used to hold the New England Championships up there. He brought me up to guest pose there in '96, and Dorian was also guest posing. I've told the story before, and we weren't on the stage at the same time, but for me to go from '93 being a glorified fan of him to being on stage guest posing at the same show he was just a huge honor for me. And it was written up in their local paper there, and they actually said that they said Palumbo was the star of the evening, star attraction of the evening. Because I was dieting, I was ready for a show or something like that, or I was like 290 pounds, something like that. And Dorian was, not as hard. He was in his off season, but it was just tremendous. I remember seeing him up there. I think we waved to each other. Dorian was not very talkative when he competed. Years after, he became much more social. But all right, let's take a look at Coleman. Let's break down Coleman, and then at the end we're going to go pose for pose, and we're going to decide who wins the virtual pose down. So Ronnie Coleman, obviously coming on the scene in 1990 or so. He went to Brian Dobson's gym. He wanted to work out there. Brian said, "You got to be competing in bodybuilding." And this is before Ronnie even lifted a weight. And he's like, "Nah, I don't want to diet or anything like that." I think Ronnie was a power lifter or something like that. And so Brian said, "I'll give you a free membership to the gym if you agree to compete in a show." So Ronnie said, "Sure." The rest is history. 91, Ronnie does the Nationals. The Nationals might be the most competitive one of all time, where Kevin Levrone wins. And Flex Wheeler was second. That was that whole lineup: Mendenhall and Dean Caputo, and Ronnie comes in fifth place, I think, at that show, or fourth place, and winds up going to the World Championships because none of the other guys can pass the drug test. Ronnie's natural at that point, gets his pro card, and then really doesn't do very much until for 4 or 5 years, and then he just comes on little by little, starts winning some pro shows. I remember he beat Flex Wheeler, I think in 95 or 6 or something like that, at a show. And next thing we know, 1998, he comes to the Olympia after winning Night of the Champions, beating Kevin Levrone, and he wins the Olympia. And then the reign starts, 8 straight wins. Which is his best one, 98 or 03 in your mind?
98.
Okay.
98. I mean, he beat a better lineup, and he had far better detail. I mean, people always say details win shows, and don't forget, you can't compare. I mean, 2003, yeah, he was big, but his waist was already blown out in terms of, compared to where it was. I mean, 90. If you look back at 98, he had like the craziest V taper like ever for him.
In 2001, when Jay Cutler, a lot of people felt, beat Ronnie, that was the first time Ronnie showed vulnerability there. Was that an off year for Ronnie, or was that just Ronnie showing his body getting older at that point?
I think it was, no, if you look back, it was not an off year at all. 2002 was an off year for him.
Yeah.
2004 was an off year for him. 2001 he was very good. Just no one had seen the likes of, Jay just brought something very special, compared to like 99 and 2000 to the Olympia. But 2001, go look at that crazy video of that last call out of the Olympia of Jay versus Coleman, which is the loudest last call out in Olympia history. People go nuts. Jim Manion was making the calls, and you couldn't even hear him. He was yelling over the microphone to make the call outs. Coleman looked great at that show. He looked great. Maybe a little bit watery, in the front, but a lot of the shows, he was able to get away with a little bit of water from the front because he always had the glutes and hams naturally from behind. So I don't think it was like an off showing by any means.
What was Ronnie's best body part in your mind?
Well, this is why he's so impressive, right? I don't know. What is impressive about him?
Arms?
He's got
arms? I don't know.
Pecs, back.
Quads?
Quads got huge. After 2001, his quads got crazy huge.
Yeah.
2001, his quads were a little on the slimmer side. 2002 was just a wash of a year. He looked like terrible 2002.
I think he sucked down too low for that show. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even count that show. After that, his legs got really big. I think that's when he started blowing out the videos with like 1,000 pounds on his back, right? Buddy,
yeah.
he went into a nut.
He went crazy.
After Jay actually beat him in 01, he did go into a nutcase.
He didn't beat it. Well, he said he beat him. We're watching right now the footage of Jay versus Ronnie. Is this 01, Johnny? Yeah, this is
Jay
the 01
won.
footage.
It was a Cedric thing. Jay won the prejudging.
Right. This is the first time Ronnie showed a vulnerability, I think, and Jay really started coming into his own in 01.
Yeah.
if we were doing I'm sure we'll do a future show about Jay Cutler versus someone, and we'll say '01 was his best look ever in his career. I'm sure.
Yeah, '01 or '03. He told you on his own show, '03, the first Arnold he won, or that Iron Man, that Arnold that year was after '01.
Yeah. So Coleman obviously has many great body parts, and I think that's what made him probably one of the greatest Olympians of all time. But it comes down to today's show, which is Dorian Yates versus Ronnie Coleman. We can reminisce all we want. They were really 10 years apart, a decade apart. They never got to step on stage against each other at their best, but we're going to do that virtually here tonight. And we're going to go pose by pose, Chris. You and I are going to decide. Here we go. Standing relaxed position from the front. Who wins, Ronnie Coleman or Dorian Yates?
At his best, I'd actually go with Dorian. Maybe not in the pictures that we're posting, but at his best, 93, 95 Dorian.
Okay. I don't know. I think Coleman maybe at his at 98 show. We're looking at '03 here, but in '98 Coleman would certainly, I don't know, maybe has better quads than Dorian. I don't know. It's tough. You're right. Dorian's got that crazy V.
Don't forget, Dave. Dorian had zero separation in his quads. I mean, he had no.
Yeah.
I mean, not separation. He had no striations at all in his quads.
Yeah.
And he had a weird-looking quad, but those quads in real life were insanely big. Remember, he has the biggest calves of all time.
I know.
Period.
That's true.
So imagine his quads, overwhelmed to some degree his calves. So how big his quads are, but his quads, what they did feature was paper thin skin, which, again is it's like a intangible that doesn't.
Standing from behind, Chris.
I would say.
I'd say Coleman because of his glutes.
Yeah, Coleman because of the glutes. Although, consistently, at least at the beginning, yeah, I would go with Coleman.
Okay. What's the next pose? Front double bicep. This is a good pose for both guys.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, Dorian Yates, before he tore that bicep, had an amazing front double bicep pose because he had the sartorius separation in that quad. He had a huge back, huge flaring lats. His arms weren't as big as Ronnie's or as good as Ronnie's, but they were really good. And he had great forearms, and I think his taper might have been a little better for the front. But Ronnie has one of the best front doubles in the history of bodybuilding. This is a tough call.
Let me ask you this because
yeah.
I'm on the fence. Okay, would you say that? Because I'm not sure, so I'm gonna coach you along. I'm gonna prosecute you. You be the witness.
Yeah.
How do you like Flex Wheeler's front double bicep?
I love it. I'm gonna go with Coleman. I'll tell you why, because it's a front double biceps pose, and I think Coleman's got some of the best biceps in the history of bodybuilding. So that's gonna clinch it for me.
Well, I figured you'd lean that way. I was trying to make the point, and I think I lean that way too. But I was going back to again '93 Olympia. You look at that was Wheeler looked absolutely insane there, and insane in the front double, and Dorian smashed him in the front double.
You're right. All right, next pose. Front lat spread. I got to give this to Dorian Yates. I don't think Ronnie even knows how to hit a front lat spread.
Yeah, Coleman just puts his chin into his chest.
Yeah. I think Paul Dillette taught him how to hit the front lat spread. Doesn't Paul Dillette do the same thing?
Yeah, but
Ronnie doesn't even have a separation between his elbows. I think his back is so big.
He never bothered to really nail it, and nobody. You know what the problem is, Dave?
What?
People at camps and stuff, and his friends and stuff probably figured like, well, we won't even tell him because he'll just kill everyone with the other poses.
Ronnie's front lat spread is like a most muscular. Only he's got his arms out to the side.
Sometimes he would lock his legs completely out. He wouldn't even bend the knees.
Yeah.
He said, "We'll get to that, Dave. We'll get to their back."
Next pose. Side chest pose. I'm hands down Coleman. Yeah,
Coleman.
Yeah.
Coleman.
The 3D aspect of his and the arm from the side is just too much, and the pecs.
Everything.
Yeah.
The hamstring from the side at its best. The shoulders, arms, the pecs.
Back lat spread. Well, first we were looking at the Christmas trees on these guys. Who had a better Christmas tree?
I think in life, Dorian.
Probably. Dorian.
But not by much. But Dorian?
Back double bicep pose.
Who'd you give the back lat spread to?
We haven't done the back lat spread yet.
A back double?
Yeah. I give it to Coleman.
Yeah, I'd give it to Coleman reluctantly.
Because the glutes and hamstrings again, and the back was just ridiculous.
Well, you know what? Coleman, yes, Coleman. Coleman had the pinched nerve injury running towards the end. Coleman actually had the pinched nerve issue like
earlier.
Yeah, it was like 2004 on. I mean, 2003. It was visible 2004, 5, and 6 that
it
something
still looked
was
great in 3 in 03.
Yeah, and 4 started to.
Dorian has a great back double, but I think Dorian's rear lat spread is really what separates him from everyone else.
Can I pause for a minute, Dave?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, it seems like so far. I just wonder how Dorian would do if he was competing
against Ronnie.
Against Coleman, like if he had to like up his craziness game.
You never know. He was falling apart though at the end though, so he was.
No, I know he was. He was falling apart at the end, but that's why it's hard to evaluate him because the last he was falling apart at the end. I mean, they all fall apart at the end. Coleman fell apart towards 2007.
Let's see the real lat spread. This is not the picture doesn't look as good, but I give Dorian Yates the real lat spread all day long.
I agree because he actually has more true width than Coleman,
which is hard to believe, but it's true. And they're both about the same height, so which is a good makes for a good comparison too.
Yeah.
Let's go to the side tricep. This was Coleman's worst pose. Didn't Gustavo Bedell beat him in the side tricep?
Yeah, he never had impressive side tricep. I give the side tricep to Dorian.
Yeah. Dorian did that unconventional with the rear leg forward and
no, because it's like the lat spread. He never even bothered to figure it all out.
All right, let's go to the next pose. Abdominal thighs.
Dorian.
Yeah, I'd have to give Dorian that pose. You're right. Most muscular? I give Coleman all day long. Most muscular.
Yeah, fuller. I'd give it to him, but with the exception of 93 and 95. I mean, those are tremendous years that Dorian probably had a most muscular that was, arguably as good as Coleman, but overall Coleman.
Now, Johnny added up all our evaluations, and we actually came up, as amazingly as this could be, with a tie, Chris. Imagine that. Which means we have to
love it. So now,
we got to go to the pose down.
We got to get Lonnie Tieper to come in, and he's going to give it the tiebreaker based on the calves to Dorian.
Yeah. So
no, we have to go to the posing round. We have to go to the posing round.
They got to go to the posing round. Right.
Like the Arnold Classic.
Who had a better presentation?
Well, you know what the good definitely Dorian had a more like planned, organized posing routine. Right. Coleman screwed up the sport because Coleman could get away with, coming up and doing no routine and just like raising the hands to the roof and wanting to hear people's, and then everyone thinks they're Coleman's. You know what I mean?
Ryan thought he had rhythm, but he didn't. He couldn't dance at all, nothing.
But it worked for Coleman. Like it was still a good routine, even though there was no routine and it wasn't even a good routine.
Right.
Just because we like the muscle, right?
All right. To me, the way you break this tie is who's got the more wow. That's hard to evaluate because it's two different eras, and when I watched the shows then as opposed to now, I saw them with different eyes, So to me, Coleman always inspired more awe, more wow to me. And I didn't think that was possible after watching Dorian, but I found that Coleman, my eyes were just like, unbelievable. This guy's unbelievable. I didn't get that from Dorian. I was impressed with Dorian, but Coleman, unbelievable.
Dave.
Yeah. No
pun intended, but I think the captain of the front lat spread, that's what I'm going to call Coleman. I think one of his videos was called Unbelievable, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So he was, pretty unbelievable, and in the aspect of, you know what, this is what we don't see at the Olympia now that you would see with a Coleman. Phil Heath was pretty unbelievable this year, I thought. But in relation to, other people, the gap isn't there. Like Coleman, with the exception if you take Jay out of the show,
Yeah.
Coleman could come out and good thing Jay was there to battle him, because otherwise it would be like, why even have the show?
Right. Right.
Because it really was Ronnie and Jay, and they would just bring the prejudging down to Ronnie and Jay. But if you take Jay out, it was just essentially like a Coleman guest pose in shape.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well, when we boil it all down, it's all about evaluating the two eras, one decade of the 90s, one decade of the 2000s, two different men from two different worlds, Dorian from England, Ronnie from Texas, which is a world in and of its own, as we all know. And it all comes down to what you like and what you don't like. And to me, Ronnie Coleman is the greatest bodybuilder of all time. While Dorian Yates might have been the guy who inspired me to be the bodybuilder I was, I believe that Ronnie Coleman was the best bodybuilder of all time. And I have to, in the final evaluation, give the nod to Ronnie Coleman. Who's your final nod to?
I'd give it to Coleman, but I think without, don't forget that, people like Dorian, without, made it possible for Ronnie. In other words, you can only be as good as the previous Mr. Olympia. I mean, you need. It's Dorian who brought to stage like a complete wacky freak factor in '93 look that may not directly inspired like Coleman. I mean, he may not look through bodybuilding magazines and say, "I want to look like that," but it breaks a barrier. You know what I mean? In your mind of like, "Wow, that's crazy freaky."
Yeah.
So while I would go with Coleman, it was Dorian that set the stage for, the future freaks, in terms of who will be Mr. Olympia, what type of look. It was clearly going to be about, after Dorian, only total freakness. You know what I mean? Nobody could come in peeled with great lines and win the show.
As Isaac Newton said, if I have seen farther than other people, it's because I've stood on the shoulder of giants. And Dorian was certainly a giant, Ronnie even a bigger giant, and how far we'll see in the future, who knows what's coming along from the big Ramis and guys that we haven't even been born yet. By the time Chris and I are 60 years old, we might see even a greater Mr. Olympia than Ronnie Coleman. For now, though, we're out of time for another episode of Versus. Stay tuned and have a great Christmas.